Good morning, church family. How you doing today? Man, what a great day to be in church. My name's TJ, pastor here at the Shore. So excited that you're here. Man, it is raining on the outside, and if I was a cheesy preacher, I would say, but the sun is on the inside. You know, S-O-N, the sun, Jesus, right? Okay, some of my church family are going, that is cheesy, but I like it. I like it. Hey, man, we are in week number 3 of our series called Family 30, and my friend Jason, Pastor Jason from Lakeland at Access Church is here today. I'm so excited. You guys don't even know what a treat you are in for this morning. I asked him, I said, hey, will you come speak for us? We're in this series. Do you want to be a part of the series or not? And he said, well, I would love to be a part of the series because talking about marriage is one of my favorite things to talk about. Will you please let me do that? And I said, absolutely. It fits right in. His wife, Liz, was with us last night at the women's event. Ladies, where you at? It was awesome. I heard it was great things. I was glad to be home with my kids, watching and working with them. One of them was kind of sick. That's okay, right? Like I was doing that dad thing because I wanted my wife here because that is really, really important for her to have those relationships and to grow in that way. So today, why don't you do me a favor? Put your hands together for my friend Jason Burns as he comes up here. Now, as he's coming up here, let me tell you this. This guy right here has been an incredible influence in my life. And today I believe that you're in a treat because I get to share him with you. I've been keeping him to myself. I promise you this. So selfish. But we've had lunches together, spent a lot of time together. And I'm telling you, he has poured into my life. Please open your heart and let him pour into yours.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It is so good to be here with you in sunny Sarasota this morning. And really excited to be here. We're going to jump into your series in just a moment, Family 30. It's going to be great. But before we do, I just hope you know how blessed you are to be a part of this church. You know, sometimes you need to hear it from an outside voice. You are so blessed to be here. You have amazing pastors, amazing leadership. If I lived within 30 minutes of Sarasota, I would just leave my church and come to this church. You know what I'm saying? It's just really good. A few years ago, I went on a 7-day fast. And if you don't know what fasting is, it's when you deny yourself something in the natural, like food, to experience God in a different kind of way. And so for 7 days, I had literally nothing to eat, nothing at all, and I just only had water to drink. And experts always say when you come off of a fast, one of the most important things is to go very slowly, like eat some fruit and vegetables. But what do experts know, right? And so I decided to end my fast at the only place that God would allow, which is Carrabba's. And so after 7 days of not eating, we go to Carrabba's, my wife and I order my meal with minestrone soup. And their minestrone soup is so good. And we sit down. The waiter puts the food in front of me, and before I can take my first bite, my wife goes, hey, wait 1 second. And I said, I've been waiting 7 days. And she said, I just want to say, I love you so much. And her eyes welled up with tears, and I just knew this was a special moment. And I don't know what happened, but out of me, the only thing that came out of my mouth was, I love the soup. And I don't know why I said that. It's just what happened. You know, we have a tendency in our life to take things that we really love for granted. And here's the principle you need to know is that when you take things for granted, they have a tendency of exiting your life. And I hope you never take for granted the beauty of this church. I hope you never take for granted the leadership of Pastor TJ and his wonderful wife Leah and this amazing place. Because if you do, you'll miss out on what God wants to do. And so let me say this to you. As a fan, as an outside voice, as someone who's cheered you on and been a part of this from a distance for a long time, you need to know the grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it, and you're in an awesome place. Can you honor your pastors together with me, everybody? Love you, man. Yeah, well, today I have the privilege of speaking part 3 of your series called Family 30, and I really do believe you can have the best kind of family if you'll work at it together for 30 days like you're talking about. And here's my assignment today, is I want to talk to you about marriage, because marriage is an unbelievably big deal. In fact, I would argue that having a healthy, God-centered marriage is the most important part of having a healthy family. Now, just so I know who I'm talking to, how many of you in the room are married? Anybody married? Okay, awesome. Anybody in the room single? Any singles in the room? Scan quickly, everybody. Awesome. Trying to hook you up. Anybody married and still looking? Anybody? Okay. No hand. One hand. Awkward. Okay. Super cool. Hey, let's get to it today. Now, when I was in college, at what feels like the end of the Civil War now, when I was in college, my friend set me up on a blind date. Anyone ever go on a blind date Lots of you on a blind date, awesome. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship with this girl, and I was so glad to be out of that relationship. And my friends were like, we know the perfect girl for you. So they set me up with this girl. She was a sweet girl, and I knew who she was, but I didn't really know her. And we went to a small Christian college at the time, and so we were going to go on a date on a Tuesday night to the Olive Garden. And before we went on Tuesday night, I just kind of wanted to spy on her, because this is like, you have Facebook now. If you're single, you've got it easy. Back in the day, we had to spy on people. And so I went to a chapel service. We had a chapel service at our Christian school, and I sat in the very back so I could watch this girl. And the first song started, the band was singing, and people started clapping, and I had one of those uh-oh kind of moments, because she clapped like this. And I don't know how to explain it to you, but like when you reach all the way down here for a clap, it just didn't sit right with me. And so anyways, I thought maybe we can work through that, and some counseling will get me through my issues. And so we go to dinner that night. She's already got one strike because of this. And so we go to dinner, and I remember what I got. I got chicken parmesan with fettuccine alfredo. And the reason I remember what I got was that was the only thing entertaining about the whole date, was that meal. It was so terribly bad. Like, having a conversation with her was like trying to have a conversation with this table. Like, it just did not happen at all. Was she sweet? Yes. Was she fun? No. And so we start talking, and every time I would talk, I would have to be the one engaging. I would have to be the one asking questions, and I would ask question after question, and when I would ask questions, she answered the same time every single time. I would ask a question, and before she would answer with a vague answer, she would go, It's like she had to think about it. It's like her mind had a buffer before she could answer the question. How's school going? Pretty good. Where were you raised? Orlando. Did you have to think? Like, it's an easy question. Like, over and over, question after question. I told my buddies that night, I was like, tomorrow, go up to that girl and ask her how she's doing. Just say what's up, and she'll be like, nothing much. Just do it. It was so funny to me. Anyways, by the end of the meal, I could not wait to get out of there. I couldn't wait to take her and drop her back off at her place. And so the bill comes, I pay the bill as quickly as I can, and I start scooting myself out of the booth, like ready to go. And as I'm scooting out, she goes, hold on one second, and she reached across the table, and she grabbed my hand and said, hey, before we go, what are we? And I said, I don't know what we are. We are done with dinner is what we are. We are going to drop you off at your house. That's what we are. We are done. Let's just be honest. We are done. That's what is happening here. It's funny how when you're dating, it's important to define the relationships. But when we get married, I think it's equally as important. We have to define our marriage. You see, if we don't define our marriage the way God intends us to define it, we will just fall into the trap of defining our marriage the way culture defines marriage. Now, I could give you all the stats about why marriage is important. I could tell you that half of marriages end in divorce. I could tell you all the stats about what it does to your family and your children. I could do all of that, but I don't need to, because all of us know on one level or another the devastating effect of divorce. Whether we've experienced it for ourselves or we've experienced it with someone close to us, we've seen the devastation that it brings. And this isn't God's intention. This isn't God's best. So I want to talk to you for a few minutes today about what does a God-honoring, God-centered marriage look like. Now, to define that, I want to define how culture views marriage. And to do that, culture, in my opinion, views marriage as what I would call a contract. Now, a contract is simply this. In a contract, we protect our rights and we limit our responsibilities. In a contract, we protect our rights and we limit our responsibilities. Here's what this looks like. Have you ever signed a contract to lease an apartment, to lease a car, or maybe to lease a cell phone, or to have a cell phone contract? In every cell phone contract that you sign, first of all, what you do is you protect your rights, which means when I sign the cell phone contract, I'm saying AT&T or Verizon or whoever you use, you are guaranteeing me cell phone coverage for where I live, and I'm limiting my responsibilities, which means I'm only going to pay you $60 a month and no more. That's how that works. And at the end of a contract, if one side doesn't meet their obligations, there is what's called a dissolution clause, which means there's a penalty. There's a way out of the contract. And the way that works is, if you've ever broken a cell phone contract like I did a few years ago, you have to pay the penalty, which for me was $250. But once I paid the penalty, once I got over the pain of that $250 loss, I was free to go my separate ways and do whatever I wanted to do with the rest of my life. This is how culture tends to view marriage. It's a contract. I'll do my part and I'll do my best, but as long as you're meeting my needs and as long as you're keeping me happy and as long as things are going well and as long as you're not so sick and as long as we have plenty of cash coming in, as long as things are good and you're holding up your end of the bargain, I'm good. Like, I'm going to stay in this contract. But the moment that I feel like my rights are not being taken care of, and I feel like I'm having to put out more than I'm receiving, the moment that happens, what do? We start looking at the dissolution clause and we say, okay, well, this is hard, but we're going to go our separate ways. And so I'm going to pay the penalty, which is we'll divide up our assets. We'll figure out where the kids go for the weekends. And the problem is this is how culture views marriage, which is a contract. And contracts, you can rip them up. They're disposable. But this isn't God's best. This isn't the way God intended marriage. I would argue that as you read through Scripture teaches completely different. It's completely contrary to what the idea of a contract. In a contract, you protect your rights and you limit your responsibilities. The Bible talks about marriage through the lens of not a contract, but a covenant. And in a covenant, we give up our rights. We pick up our responsibilities. We give up our rights. We pick up responsibilities. I want you to notice something here. In a contract, both sides have to fulfill their part of the obligation, and if one side isn't doing it, it's easy to get out of the contract. But in a covenant, you're making the decision that I don't even have rights. I'm giving up my rights. In a covenant, all it takes is one person saying, I'm fully committed because of the vow that I made before God and before you and before all of our loved ones. I'm going to do this. Now, here's the idea biblically of a covenant. In a covenant, when you're giving up your rights and you're picking up your responsibilities, this word covenant literally translated means like a holy and sacred promise. It's something bigger and more solemn than a contract because it has a spiritual undertone to it. But beyond that, if you go back to the Old Testament, like the writing of the Old Testament, this word covenant literally would just translate in Hebrew to the word that we would use for the word cut. And this is kind of a fun word. In that culture, in the ancient Hebrew culture at a wedding ceremony, before the bride and groom would walk the aisle, they would actually take farm animals. They would take pigs and goats and cows, and they would literally cut them. And when I say cut them, I mean cut them in half. And they would take one half of the animal and put it on this side and one half and put it on that side of the aisle. And the bride and groom would go walking through the cut up animals. Now, weddings in our day seem so boring in comparison, doesn't it? Like, just have a half of a horse on this side and see how much cooler your wedding is, right? And so, but here's what they were symbolizing. What they were saying was, if something should happen to us where we don't fulfill our commitment to each other, if we don't live out this covenant, may what happened to these animals happen to us as well. Beyond that, in a wedding ceremony, often what they would do is the bride and groom would take a knife and they would cut themselves. Kind of a gross thing to think about in our culture, but they would do this, and they would take their cut hands or wrists and they would touch them together, and it was symbolic. This is where we get the term blood covenant from, because what they were saying is, this covenant that we're making, it's permanent. We're becoming one. And in the same way that your blood is in me and my blood is in you, now that our blood has intermingled, we can't undo it. You can't undo this. In the same way, what a covenant, a marriage covenant represents is, it's that we are becoming one. And once we become one, you can't un-one what God makes one. So in a marriage covenant, we're giving up our rights. We're picking up our responsibilities. And so here's what I want to do today. If you're going to have a marriage that goes the distance, that when you stand at an altar and you say for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, my hope is that all of us can make not just the commitment and make the covenant, but that we can actually make it. That we can be the kind of people that in a culture where people give up on marriage very quickly, that we can be the kind of people who actually stand the test of time, and that our marriage can be a testimony, which means a story to the world that so desperately needs this. So here's what I want to do. For the next few minutes we have, I just want to talk about, if we're in a covenant, if you've made a covenant with each other, I want to talk about the rights that we give up. And then I want to talk about the responsibilities that we pick up. So let's start with the rights that we give up. Now, to understand this, I want to go all the way back to the very beginning of the Bible, to the book of Genesis. Theologians and scholars will often say about the book of Genesis that everything that is God's best, you can turn back to in the book of Genesis 1 and 2 and find his intention behind it. If you don't know the Bible, Genesis 1 is this beautiful poetic story of the creation of the world. Genesis chapter 1 says that God speaks. His words are powerful. The Hebrew phrase is ex nihilo, which literally means out of nothing God speaks and he creates. And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which means God spoke and there was light, and he spoke and there was darkness. He literally littered the galaxies with stars and planets farther than we'll ever be able to reach with modern science. He creates the world and he fills it with water and trees and plants and vegetation. Then he creates animals, and he creates all different kinds of animals, and he creates every different form of rose and beetle and star and grass. He creates every single bit of this. And as God creates, there is this rhythm and there is this cadence to it. He creates and he says it's good. He creates and he says it's good. He creates and he says it's good. And as God creates in Genesis chapter 1, each piece of his creation gets more and more intricate as he creates. At the end of his creation, he gets towards the end. And remember, he's been saying it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, God creates the first man. The way God creates man is he takes the dirt of the ground and he forms it together into the form of a person. He was going to name him Adam. Literally translated from Hebrew, Adam means from clay. God takes this clay, this ground, and he pushes it together. And if we were there and looking, what we would see is the form of a man, a lifeless body. You would see a corpse. You would see lips, hips, and fingertips, but you wouldn't see a person because you would just see a form. And the Bible says in Genesis 2:7 that God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. The Hebrews believed that our breath and our soul were somehow intertwined, that he wasn't a human, he wasn't a person until he experienced the breath of God, which one fun thing about the breath of God is that your soul and my soul is the breath of God, and we are living on the borrowed breath of God. And beyond all that, one of the things I love about our souls is simply this: out of all of God's creation, of every animal, of everything that breathes the oxygen we breathe, we are the only pieces of God's creation that have the borrowed breath of God. God creates humanity. He puts this man in this garden, and he creates Adam, and Adam's living the bachelor's dream. He's in this beautiful garden. He doesn't have to wear any clothes. The whole world is his bathroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, some of you guys are trying to live that dream now. It's not happening, guys. It's like he places him in this garden, this perfect place, but then God says it's not good. After all of his creation where he says it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, he creates Adam and he puts him in this garden. He's like, it's not good. He looked around and realized that Adam had a lot of pets, but he didn't have a best friend. He had a lot of good things happening, but he didn't have what he needed, which is a helper. So the verses go on to say in Genesis chapter 2, we're going to start in verse 21. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs. So I want you to notice this. He cuts Adam. The only way to get to a rib is to cut. So this is the first covenant. This is a cut. He cuts Adam. He takes his rib and he closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib that he had taken of the man, and he brought her to the man. So remember, to this point, Adam is alone in the garden. He falls into a deep sleep. He's never seen a woman. And then all of a sudden, God wakes him from his sleep and he sees this woman for the first time. And I want you to notice this. He goes from being a bachelor to being someone that now has a suitable helper. He sees this woman, and watch his language. Ladies, you have immense power over men. He does. He turns into a poet. He says this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Listen, this man's like dropping beats. You know, it's like, she shall be called woman, for when I saw her, I was like, whoa, man. Actually, that's not in the Bible. She was taken out of a man. Then look at this. I want you to notice these three things we're going to read. For this reason, a man and woman will leave his father and mother. He's going to show priority to his wife and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. Everything they have is going to be shared ownership. The man and woman, his wife, the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. There was like no privacy issues whatsoever. That's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. These are the rights that we're going to give up. If you're going to be in a God-honoring covenant, you have to understand this simple principle. There's some rights you give up, and the first one's from these verses, and it is the right of priority. Here's what this looks like in a God-honoring marriage. When you are married, the world doesn't revolve around you. When you are married in a God-centered, God-honoring marriage, it means that your spouse, your husband or your wife, has full priority in every part of your life. That's what it means. A few years ago, I was speaking at my church, and I was talking about marriage and love and relationships. And I leave my house super early on Sunday mornings, and my wife was still in bed on this particular Sunday. And as I was leaving the bedroom, I said, hey, babe, I'm talking about marriage and love. What is like marriage and love? Like, what does it mean to you? And this is a question that scholars have argued over for generations, you know. And my wife just goes, just means you before me. And then she fell back asleep. I said, dang, girl, how smart are you? Like, you were half asleep when you said that. You know, how smart are you when you're awake, right? And she just said, it's you before me. And this is what love is. Love, when you make love a priority, love is you before me. It's your needs ahead of my needs. Here's what this means practically in my life. The last few weeks or really months, my schedule has gotten so overwhelmed with opportunities. And the truth is, I want to do all of them. I want to travel all over the world and speak at all the cool places and get to do all the amazing things. But I've started submitting it to my wife, saying, listen, you're my priority. You matter more than the opportunities that I have. What do you think we should do? I schedule her. Her needs are ahead of my needs. Everything that we do is shared. It's a priority. She's my priority. Then here's what happens to all of us. You get married, you have a few fun years together, and then you start having kids. You start popping these cute little babies out that look like you, and then they get busy. They've got soccer schedules and music lessons and after-school tutoring and all kinds of just busyness, right? And what happens is we get to be going all of our separate ways, and over time what happens is we unintentionally prioritize our kids over our spouse, and then what happens? They get old and go to college, and we're stuck with each other, and we don't even really know each other after that. So one of the most important decisions you can make, especially if you have young kids, is show your kids that you prioritize your wife over them. Show your kids that your spouse matters more than they do. Let me offer you a piece of advice. Every single year, I take my wife on at least one vacation where we leave our kids at home. Now, I love doing vacations where we take our kids. I don't call those vacations, I call them trips. There's a huge difference. We take trips with our kids, but every year I take a vacation with my wife. And you know what my kids do every single time when I leave for vacation with my wife? Oh, I want to go. You know what? Sucker, I'm taking my wife. You can stay home. Why? I'm showing my kids the proper order because I want them to do this as well someday. Someday, my kids will grow, they'll get old, they'll leave me. My wife and I, we're in this together forever because we're in a covenant. Here's my question to you for number one. Have you shown your spouse that he or she is your priority? Have you made them know beyond a shadow of a doubt, you are more important to me than anything else, any other opportunity. You're even more important than our kids. You are my priority. Have you done that? Number two, the second right we give up is the right of ownership. Ownership simply means this. Everything we have is co-owned and co-administrated. Everything we have is co-owned and co-administrated. The easiest place to talk about this is in our money. Now, in our money, my wife and I made a decision. It's called a financial agreement of unity. Everything we have is ours. It's not mine. It doesn't matter if I earned it or if she earned it. Everything we have is co-owned and co-administrated. Now, in my family for the last 10 years, my oldest son just turned 10. For the last 10 years, the decision my wife and I made was that she would be a stay-at-home mom. Now, she travels, she's written a book, she does a lot of different things, but the predominant amount of her work hours during the week are spent working, taking care of, and managing the craziness of our home life. Now, this is the decision we made. Maybe it doesn't apply to you, but what that means in my family is probably 90 to 95% of the money that we earn as a family is money that I earned. Now, she earns some, but most of it comes from the work that I do, right? Now, it would be easy when we fight at times to say, well, you don't have a voice. You don't get to decide where we spend money. You shouldn't go to Target and spend $50. By the way, did you know you can't leave Target without spending $50? It is not. You go in for a pack of gum and you spent $65. I don't know how it happens. It's weird, but that happens, right? Here's what I learned. At the end of the day, all of our money, every penny we have is co-owned and co-administrated. I see couples sometimes that they're married, they've been married for 20 years, and they have separate bank accounts. It's not that that's wrong. I've just never understood that. Why do anything that shows any sort of sign of disunity? Why do that? Everything we have is co-owned and co-administrated. That means your money. It means your time. Let me offer you one other thought this kind of steps into your business just a little bit, but even your body is not yours. It's co-owned and co-administrated. That means my body belongs to my wife and my wife's body belongs to me. Paul says it like this in the book of 1 Corinthians. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. And I'm like, girl, you can have it anytime you want. You know what I'm saying? Unhindered access. That's what it is. Now, this verse means exactly what you think this verse means. It means, wives, your body isn't your own. You should use it and give it to your husband as much as you can. And husbands, this is not an appropriate time to elbow your wife. But in the same way, let me come after the husbands for a second, because it's easy to kind of pick on the wives in this one, but it's harder to talk about the husbands. Husbands, here's what this looks like. Your body isn't your own. So what that means is if your wife asks you to use your height to reach something in a high up shelf, get up and reach it for her. If it means to use your strength to move something, lift something, put something in the garage, take out the trash, mow the grass. If she asks you to do anything that involves your body, get up and do it. Why? Because it's not your body. You gave it to her as a part of this covenant. Your body is co-owned and co-administered with her. Let me just offer you one other free piece of advice, men, and this might get me uninvited to ever speak here again. But guys, if you will use your body to serve your wife, to put her needs ahead of your own, I'll let you figure out the rest on your own. Okay, so first right we give up is the right of priority. The second right is the right of ownership. The third right we give up, in my opinion, is the right of privacy. Let me say what this means. This means that my wife has full, unhindered access to every part of my life. Full, unhindered access to every part of my life. Now, all of us, when we feel like this, when we think about this, don't we kind of cringe a little bit? Like if your spouse were to just pick up your cell phone and go through it, doesn't that feel a little invasive? Like you should have some kind of privacy? Well, the reality is maybe she doesn't need to, or maybe he doesn't need to, but they should be able to at any point. My wife can pick up my phone. She can go through my email. She can go through my Twitter messages. She can go through anything she wants at any point. Why? Because she has full, unhindered access to every part of my life. Now, the reason this feels invasive is all of us at some point or another have this sense in our souls that if she knew everything about me, if he knew everything about me, then maybe he or she wouldn't love me. Maybe if I'm fully known, I won't be fully loved. And so what we do is we try to hide. Think back to the early days of your dating. Don't you hide the secret parts of you? Don't you hide the habits and the addictions? Don't you hide the things you wish you could undo? Don't you hide the regrets and the decisions you made from your past? But we all do that. The problem is, if you carry it into marriage, you're portraying a false image of yourself, and your wife or your husband can't love who you pretend to be. They can only love you. Let me say it to you like this. Are there any parts of your marriage, any parts of your life, that if your spouse found out about it, your internet history, the pill addiction you have, the online relationships and friends you have, the ex-boyfriend who just started Facebook messaging you out of the blue for no reason, the girl at work who's just a little flirty, the guy at work who's just a little touchy, are there any parts of your marriage that if your spouse found out about it, you would be mortified over it? You see, here's the principle. The Bible says in Genesis 2:25, which we read a moment ago, that Adam and Eve were naked in the garden and they felt no shame. That meant that they were physically naked, but it also meant figuratively that they were naked, that there was nothing between them, separating them. There was nothing in between them. They had full transparency. And let me offer you the principle. You can't be fully loved unless you're fully known. You can't be fully loved unless you're fully known. That's the reason that groups here at this church, connect groups, are such a big deal. Why? You need people in your life that you take the mask off with that fully know you, because once you're fully known, then you can receive full love. It's so true in your marriage. All of us have to make this decision. I'm giving up the rights. I'm just giving up the rights to priority. I'm no longer number one. I'm giving up the right to ownership. It's not mine. It's co-owned and co-administrated. And number three is I'm giving up the right to privacy, which means you have full, unhindered access to every part of my life. So we give up some rights, and that feels a little deflating, if I'm honest. But then also we have to pick up some responsibility. There's some stuff you and I are responsible to do, and this all comes out of the book of Ephesians. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of these verses. I'm going to summarize for you. And I want you, when you get home today, to go home and read Ephesians 5:21 through the end of the chapter. And let me kind of summarize it for you. In Ephesians 5:22, Paul says this to the wives. He says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord." Now, if that's all you knew from the verse, that feels a little deflating, doesn't it, ladies? It feels a little bit like misogynistic, a little oppressive at times. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul isn't trying to oppress you. He's actually trying to free you. Paul says, "Wives, submit to your husbands." Week one of the series, I watched the message. Pastor TJ came out and he talked about what the idea of submission means. It means to be under a mission. What a beautiful, beautiful talk. I'll submit this to you. I believe that biblical submission of a wife simply means that you trust your husband with everything. You trust him with your heart, your soul, your dreams. You trust him with everything. It means you cheer him on with everything you've got, that you're his biggest fan in life. There's plenty of people in the world looking to crush you when you step out and dream. You need someone who's got your back in every possible way. Let me say it to you like this. I don't believe that submission means sacrifice. I don't think it means you're sacrificing your dream. I believe what it means is that you're coming alongside of each other and you're supporting each other. That's what it means. Then he goes on to the husband. He talks to the wife for 3 verses. To the husband, he talks for 8 verses. Now, I'm not saying that there's 8 or there's 3 times the amount of responsibility, but it's almost 3 times the amount of verses. And he says, "Husbands, love your wife the way Christ loved the church." How did Jesus love the church? He gave his life for it. Check this out. Jesus gave his life for the church preemptively. Before you and I were ever born, he gave his life for us. Husbands, what would it look like if we were the preemptive bringers of love and grace and mercy in our homes. Let me take it a step farther. Husbands, what would it look like if you and I were so willing to meet our spouse's needs, that we were able to meet our wife's needs with everything we've got? How powerful would it be if we would say to our wife, I want the best for you, I want God's best for you, and I'm willing to give anything, including my life, to see your dreams. The dreams that are tucked away in maybe the deepest parts of your soul. I'll give everything, including my life, to seeing your dreams come true. Who wouldn't want to be a part of a marriage like that? That is God's intention. So what are the responsibilities we pick up? The first one is this. We have to make the decision that we're going to love unconditionally. What does this look like for us? Well, here's what it means. If you were to read this sentence and you were to get married and say, well, of course, this is what love should look like. It should be unconditional. The truth is, though, all of our love has conditions on it. It just does. I do a lot of premarital counseling. I've got a lot of young families in my church. And we do a lot of premarital counseling, and one of the things I've started doing in premarital counseling is I sit down with these couples, and they're so in love. Completely, just full transparency. Sometimes they're in love with love. Like, they're in love with the idea that someone loves them. They don't really love the person, they love the love. I'm like, tell me why you love each other. And like, when he smiles, it just does something. I just want to punch you in the face. What is wrong with you? That's not love. That's not love at all. Love is a decision. Love is a choice. We talk about love like it's a noun, something we fall out of or fall into. But love was always intended to be something that we do, not something that we feel. And so love becomes something different when it's unconditional. So I'll say to couples, like, what are the conditions on your love? If you found out that she was having an affair, if you found out that he had a porn addiction, if you found out that she had gotten into some sort of emotional thing with this guy at work and she's struggling, what would you do? If you found out that he had been secretly hiding money, like what would you do? See, all of us, we get married and we think it's unconditional, but the truth is, if we're not intentional about it, we fall into the trap of there being conditions on our love. I think there should be one condition on your love, and I think it should be until death do you part. I think that should be the only condition on your love. Let me offer you two quick stories. The first one is this. 6 months into my marriage, and if you were here, ladies, last night, you heard my wife speak. You heard her probably tell some of her story. 6 months into my marriage, my beautiful Italian bride was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, 6 months into marriage. So 6 months into marriage, we were shaving my wife's beautiful hair. She got as sick as could be. And on one particular night, I came home. I was speaking at this camp about 30 minutes away, and my wife was as sick as I'd ever seen her. And she had fallen asleep on the couch with her hands over her chest. Her eyes were sunken in. There was no color to her skin. And if I'm just honest with you, I came home and opened the door, and she looked dead on the couch. And I walked in. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, and I sat down next to her. I put my hand on her and said, babe, Liz. And she kind of startled and came to. And instantly, I just felt this sense of relief. But she was so overcome with emotion. She was so sick. She was so hopped up on whatever medicine they had her on. And I helped her get up, and I walked her to the room. And along the walk to the room, it's like she became the Hulk. All of a sudden, she got this supernatural burst of strength, and she was just crazy. And she started getting angry, and it was a super weird moment. It was super emotional. But she starts screaming at me, "This isn't fair to you. Leave me. Please just leave me. Just let me die. This isn't fair to you. You shouldn't have to put up with this. You're so much better than this. It's not worth it. Please leave me." And then she started pushing me, and she hit me at one point. And I literally grabbed her, and I pushed her up against the wall, and I said, "You look at me. I'm not going anywhere. I love you. 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 I don't know if I've gotten a lot of things right in my marriage, but I got this moment right. I said, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. At some point, love has to be a choice. One time I was speaking at a college, and I told this story, and I had an older man come up to me, and he said, "I write plays that become movies, and they become Broadway plays. Can I use your story?" And I'm like, send a brother a check. You know what I'm saying? Have at it. But the reality is, in that moment, it would have been easy to walk away. But love is a choice. Love is a decision. 2 Sundays ago, I was at my church. I was standing on the front row. We were singing the first line of the first worship song. And I got a text from my dad that my grandmother, who I love, had just taken her final breath. She had passed away. And it was this super emotional time for me. I mean, I loved this lady. She was such a sweet lady. That week, I flew to Dallas, and we were a part of the service. I got to do part of her funeral service. And the night before the funeral was the viewing, where they have her body laid in a casket. And her husband, she and her husband have been married 61 and a half years. And I'll never forget, a year and a half before this, they had asked me, their grandson, who's a pastor, to do the vow renewal ceremony for them. 60 years. I'm like, do you need to renew it at this point? Aren't you good at this point? But they wanted to, and so they sat in chairs because they were too old to stand for the ceremony. And they did the vows for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, knowing they had lived 60 years of this. And I said, do you still take her to be your bride? Do you still take him to be your husband? And they said, I do. Then they kissed, and it was the most beautiful, gross thing ever. It was beautiful because of the sacredness of this moment, but it was gross because there was this like drool chain between them. Super gross. But in my heart, I'm like, I want that. I want that. And so we were there at the viewing, and I walk up with my grandfather, and he sees his bride of 61 and a half years lying in this coffin, this casket. And he says, she's so beautiful. I want to drop to one knee and ask her to marry me all over again. Okay, people, I want that. That's what I want. When I say till death do us part, that's the kind of unconditional love that I want. All right, I need to move on or I'm going to cry. Number 2, we have to make the decision to honor respectfully. Now, honor is a huge deal. Honor simply means to add value to add weight to. The funny thing is, many of us will seek honor somewhere else because we don't get it at home. Honor simply means that you have such a voice, you have such value. Your voice is louder and more important than anyone else's voice in my life. But the funny thing is, I don't see this happen in a lot of Christian homes. I see people having to seek affirmation somewhere else. So let me just get in your business and say this. Ladies, it is possible that the reason he'd rather be on the golf course than at home is because he's affirmed there. Guys, maybe the reason she'd rather have a ladies' night every night of the week is because she finds affirmation there. What would it look like if the homes became the place of the most honor, where we're honestly just saying, I value you. You matter. Your opinion matters more than anyone else's opinion. The final thing is this. We have to make the decision to love unconditionally, to make the decision to honor respectfully, and number 3, to submit mutually. Now, in the book of Ephesians, I kind of quoted the verses for you from Ephesians 5:22 on, but in Ephesians 5:21, the verse before it, Paul says this: if you're going to have a marriage that goes the distance, you have to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. He doesn't say, wives, submit to your husband, and that's it. He doesn't say, husband, submit to your wife. It's literally both of you have to make the decision together to put each other's needs ahead of your own. We make the decision to put each other's needs ahead of our own. And doesn't it feel a little weird? Doesn't it feel like in some way we're sacrificing that we're not going to get our needs met? The fun thing is, in a God-honoring, God-centered marriage, it's all about seeing who can meet each other's needs the best way. Instead of keeping score in a negative way, the way a lot of couples in the world tend to do it, we get to keep score in a fun way. The score is, how am I serving you? How am I meeting your needs? How am I blessing you? Let me say it to you like this. I have seen plenty of marriages fall apart in all of my years of pastoring. Plenty of marriages. Over the last few months, we've had some nasty marriage issues. Nasty. All kinds of affairs, all kinds of gross things have happened. I've seen a lot of tragic, terrible things. Can I tell you something, though? I have never seen a couple that has made the decision that they are in a covenant with each other, that you can't unone what God makes one, who's made the decision to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. I have never seen a couple like that ever get divorced ever, in all of my years ever. Why? Because they've made the decision that when we stood before God and when we said, till death do us part, they meant till death do us part. So here's my challenge to you. I'm going to challenge every single married person to go home today and to ask yourself the question, am I in this covenant? Have I made this decision? Or have we become one and we can't unone what God makes one? We might as well make this great. So we're going to give up our rights. We're going to give up the right to priority, give up the right to ownership, give up the right to privacy. Maybe you need to have some hard conversations. We're going to go home. We're going to pick up some responsibilities. I'm going to love you unconditionally. Maybe some of you need to go home and apologize for the conditions you've put on your spouse. Maybe some of us need to go home and say, I haven't honored the way that I need to honor you, and I'm going to fix this. Some of us need to go home and say that I haven't submitted to you. I've been selfish in this. Let me say it to you like this. Selfish people can't be in a covenant. That's just how it works. And you and I have to make this decision that we are going to put each other's needs ahead of our own. Let me say this to you, single person in the room. If you'll make the decision that you're not going to settle for anything less than God's best, you're going to enter into a covenant, go into your relationships, go into your marriage with your eyes as open as you know how. Let me end with this thought. I want you to have the best family ever. In fact, the reason I think this series matters so much isn't for your happiness, though it would be wonderful if you were happy for the rest of your life. I think the reason this series matters more than anything is we live in a culture that is increasingly dark, where divorce is the normal. What would it look like, though, If we had a marriage and a family that became a testimony to the world. What is a testimony? It's your story. The kind of story that people look at and they say, man, I don't know what it is about that, but I want whatever they've got. The same way I feel about standing at the altar with my grandparents and that weird kiss thing, the same way that happens, I want people to look in at your life and at your marriage and say, I want what they've got. How do you have a family that makes it the distance? How do you have a family that loves each other? A family where the kids are a joy and not a job? How do you have a family that goes the distance where you love each other, that someday your kids will stand at your graveside and say, I was blessed with the best? How do you have that? By starting with a God-honoring marriage. So I'm going to challenge you today. Go home and read these scriptures again and look at it like a mirror, not a window. See, we have a tendency in these kind of messages to think, man, hope my husband is listening. Hope my wife heard that thing. We do. Scripture was never intended to be a window. It was a mirror that we look back at ourselves and we say, God, what are you saying to me? Would you bow your head and close your eyes with me all across this room? I want to pray with you now. God, for so many of us, this is so challenging. Maybe for us, it means that we just never had this modeled in our life. We've never had a good example. For others of us, God, it just means that we've just failed. We just haven't lived up to our end of the covenant that we made. God, for those of us who need to adjust, give us the courage to correct our course, to right the direction of our marriages. God, for those of us who have viewed marriage as a contract, we ask for your forgiveness. For those of us who have just never fulfilled our part of the covenant, God, give us the courage to stand up to a culture that says, get your needs met, and to be the people who meet needs, to submit to one another, to love unconditionally, to honor respectfully. God, I thank you that as we do this, that we will have raised families who know and love each other and who know and love you. That we will be a testimony, a story that is bright to an increasingly dark world. And God, I pray so much that over these next few months, that as we apply these principles, that you'll deepen our relationship, our marriage with each other. And God, as a result of that, I pray that we'll even grow closer to you. We thank you for that, God, in Jesus' name. With your head still bowed and your eyes still closed, if you're here and you would say, Jason, heard what you're talking about. Hear you talking about God and the God who loves me, but the truth is I don't even know if I'm right with God. Let me say this to you. You can't have a God-honoring covenant and not be in a relationship with that God. So maybe you're here and you don't know if you're right with God, and maybe that means that you prayed a prayer when you were a little kid, but you've just strayed away from your relationship with God. Or maybe that means for you that you're here and you've never made a decision once and for all to surrender your life to Jesus. If that's you and you want to surrender your life to Jesus now, no one's looking, because this is a personal moment between you and God. But if you want to, when I pray in a moment, if you want to be included in that prayer to become a follower of Jesus, would you just quietly raise your hand right now and say, Jason, include me? Here's your moment. Thanks. Here's your moment. Thank you. For those of you who have responded, here's your moment. In a moment, I'm going to pray. If you responded, I'm going to ask you with your own heart and your own words to repeat this after me. I want you to hear me say this. Praying a prayer doesn't make you a Christian. It's the act of surrendering your life to Jesus that does. So would you pray this with me all across this room in your own heart with your own words? Jesus, today I make this decision. I surrender my life to you. Jesus, I believe that you came into this world for one mission. And that mission was to die on a cross for me. And I believe that when you died on the cross, you paid the price for my sins. And because you paid the price for me, now I can receive forgiveness of my sins. My soul can be saved. And I can be made new. So Jesus, I invite you to take over my life, to forgive my sins, to erase my sins, and from this day forward, I'll live for you. I love you, and I surrender my life to you. From this point on, I'll live for you. I love you, Jesus, and I give you my life. And it's in your name I pray. Amen.